Okay, so what I'm going to do next here is a bit of a calculator tutorial just for a common issue that I've noticed with students who don't appear to know the appropriate way to put scientific notation into your calculator. And to demonstrate this, I'm going to use the first example off of the worksheet that dealt with prefix to unit conversions. And this is a great example because you'll notice here that we've got two scientific notation numbers in this calculation that are going to need to be either multiplied in the case of the 1 times 10 to the third and divided in the case of 1 times 10 to the negative 12. And so I want to just show you in your calculator what happens if you don't plug these in properly. And so hopefully you'll be able to see, I know it's kind of small, but I wanted to show the whole calculator so I could at least show where the buttons are located for this type of calculation. So let's keep in mind, I'm going to just start off with putting in what most people probably do when they type these numbers into their calculator and just show you the answer that we're going to get. So if I did 4.76 and I multiplied that by 1 times 10 to the third, and this is the way a lot of students will type this in, they'll do 1 times 10 to the third. And so you'll notice there that the number is kind of written out, and I use the multiplication symbol for the times 10, and I actually put the exponent on the 10 to the third there. So they would do 4.76 times 1 times 10 to the third. And maybe you calculate that separately and then you move on to the next calculation. But if you're typing this all in one line in your calculator, which is faster and also it's what I usually prefer to do, then the next step is to divide by 1 times 10 to the negative 12. And so I would hit divide, and then I do 1 times 10 to the negative 12. Right? And so notice there, again, typing it all out with the multiplication symbol for the times 10 and then using that exponent for negative 12. And so if I type it in my calculator like this, let's note what number I'm going to get. So notice here the value I get from this method is 4.76 times 10 to the negative 9th. Now, that is not the correct number, right? So this is not correct. But you typed it in correctly, right? Like, it's not like you did something wrong conceptually. You know, if you're doing this on a homework assignment or on an exam or a quiz or something, it can be super frustrating because obviously your setup is correct. Obviously you typed it into your calculator, you know, correctly in terms of what's supposed to be multiplied and what's supposed to be divided. So this is kind of frustrating that we're getting a number here that's not the correct answer. So what the heck is going on here? Well, by typing in these numbers in with the multiplication symbol and with these exponents like you did, the order of operations is kind of screwed up here. So if I go back up into the calculator, I just want to point out here that the way your calculator read this was they did 4.76 times 1, and ooh, that's a little harder to see when it's black, so let me not highlight it. But it does 4.76 times 1 times 10 to the third divided by 1, and then here's the real kicker. It then multiplies by 10 to the negative 12th. It doesn't divide by times 10 to the negative 12th. And that's because order of operations with multiplication and division is that you go from left to right with these order of operations. And this divided by symbol is really only being interpreted as divide by 1 because it recognizes as soon as you put the multiplication symbol that then you're trying to multiply by 10 to the negative 12th. And so that's no longer part of the division step that's happening there. Now, what most students will do to correct this is they'll type it in using parentheses. So we'll do 4.76, and this time we'll surround the, and we can do a multiplication symbol here, or we can leave it out because, you know, parentheses essentially implicate multiplication. But they'll still type their scientific notation the same way, so times 10 to the third, but they'll separate everything with parentheses so that the calculator recognizes that that 1 times 10 to the third is happening first, right? That calculation with the multiplication symbol has to happen before you multiply by 4.76. And so this will clear up the problem when we get to the division symbol, because if we surround this with parentheses and do 1 times 10 to the negative 12th, now that this is in parentheses, it will actually divide by 10 to the negative 12th. It won't take that multiplied step and multiply your number. And if I punch this in, you'll notice that now we get the value 4.76 times 10 to the 15th. And so that is actually the correct number. And so notice parentheses are enough to fix the issue. So what I often tell students first is if you're just so in the habit of typing out scientific notation as times 10 to the whatever the exponent is, and you don't want to change much about your way that you use your calculator, then just go ahead and remember that every scientific notation number needs to be enclosed in parentheses so that you avoid any potential problems with orders of operation. That will solve the issue, and that seems to be the simplest fix for most people, is just remember that you have to put those numbers in parentheses. Now, what I do want to point out to you, though, is the way your calculator is intended to be used with scientific notation is to use the notation that the calculator is used to. And you'd be surprised to recognize that you already understand this notation because the numbers up here, these answers, are being expressed in the way that the calculator interprets scientific notation, and that is with this E symbol. Now, this E symbol is not the same thing as the exponential function, so it's not, lowercase e, which is a totally different math concept. But this E symbol is meant to represent times 10 to the, and whatever number you have after that E is interpreted as the exponent. So it recognizes that, this whole thing is one number when you use that E as your way of defining scientific notation. So the calculator already spits out answers like this with the E. How do we put in numbers using that E symbol to represent the scientific notation? So I'm going to type this calculation in one more time and show you how this works. So 4.76, and I'm going to do times 1, and here's where it comes in. We're going to hit the second button, and then the E symbol is where the comma is, right here above the 7 on most graphing calculators. You may have to look for it. It's a double E. It might be kind of hard to see in the video here, but in blue above my comma symbol here, I have this double uppercase E. And so I hit the second function button to access it, and then I hit that button, and you notice I get my uppercase E. And so now all I have to do for times 10 to the third is put a 3. And now that number is taken care of. Now notice how many fewer keys you have to hit in order to represent this number. I don't have to do the parenthesis, the 1, the multiplication symbol, the 1 and the 0 for the 10. The to the third involves hitting the exponent button, the raised power button, and then the 3, and then another parenthesis. So that's, what I get up to here. 8 keys just to type in 1 times 10 to the third. Whereas the way I did it, I did a 1, I did the second button, I did the E, and then I did the 3. So I've taken 8 key presses and I've reduced it down to just 4 key presses to type in that number. And that, if that's not motivation enough for you to switch the way you do this to this better way of putting scientific notation into your calculator, I don't know how else to motivate you, but it will streamline things. You'll notice it even makes the calculation shorter on the calculator's screen. And this is the way that these calculators are intended to be used when you're putting in scientific notation. That's why they represent the answers with the E as that notation. Now, if I go to do my divided by step, same thing, I'm going to just divide, and then I can type in 1 second E, and then just do -12. And so notice there, again, I don't have to use any parentheses. I don't have to worry about the exponent button. It will interpret this entire number up until you put another mathematical operator in there. It'll interpret the -12 all as being part of the exponent. So you don't even have to put the -12 in parentheses. That is part of how the calculator understands this, is it takes anything that comes after the E as part of the exponent until you type in some other mathematical operator. And so that could be a parenthesis, or it could be a multiplication symbol. It can even be a to the power. So like, if I put this to the 9th power here, it actually interprets that as 1 times 10 to the -12, all to the 9th power. So it's not just taking the 2 to the 9th or the 12 to the 9th. It actually knows to interpret that 1 times 10 to the -12 as one number, as if it's in parentheses, and then that to the 9th power on the outside. So you can really start to see here how this streamlines typing things into your calculator. And just to demonstrate that this will give the same answer, notice here that when I put that in, I get 4.76 times 10 to the 15th, which was our correct answer. So notice again the differences in the way these two were plugged in. We have a shorter expression that I've plugged into the calculator by using that E expression to represent the scientific notation. I have less keys that I have to press, and it ensures that you get the correct number because you don't have to worry about order of operations. So if you forget to put something in parentheses, when it comes to scientific notation at least, it won't screw up your answer like we saw with the first one. The last thing I'll point out with all of this is, if this is something that you've got to train yourself to get used to, watch out for cues that you've done something wrong. If you know how to interpret these calculations for what you're expecting for the values, then you should be able to recognize when you've typed something in the calculator incorrectly. For this calculation, kilometers is a very large length, right? That's many, many, many meters. And we're trying to convert into picometers here, which is a very, very small length, which is actually only a portion of 1 meter. So if we're representing a long length like kilometers, which has many meters in it, with a short length that is actually equal to less than a meter, then that means that the number we get in picometers should be a really large value. So if I know that both these numbers were supposed to end up with units of picometers, it doesn't make sense for me to get a 10 to the negative 9th value at the end here, because this is saying that I have less than a picometer. And how can 4.76 kilometers be equal to less than a picometer? That doesn't make any sense. It does make sense to have a value that's very large here, because if I know that picometers is a much smaller unit than kilometers, then 4.76 kilometers should be a larger number of picometers, right? So I have a very large number here. So watch out for things like that. It's always a good idea to think about the answers you're getting and whether or not they make sense. Before you move on in a calculation or to another problem, make sure your answer kind of makes sense in the context of what the problem is trying to achieve. And I know that can be a really hard thing to do at first because it involves really fully understanding what you're doing. But if you challenge yourself to ask these questions, to double check your answers, then you will understand these concepts better. And it's just better overall. So I hope that was helpful for how to use your calculator. Again, you can look up this method pretty easily by just searching, scientific notation in graphing calculators on YouTube or whatever if you want to see more videos on how this is done. But let me know if you're still confused.